All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's virtual star party. I am super excited to have you all with us tonight. And my name is Beth Laychak. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications at the Canada-France-Hawaii Telescope.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's
that's our technical difficulties for this evening, guys.
I'm super excited to have you all with us tonight.
Sorry about that.
And
I'm hearing myself on like 3 different channels.
My name is Beth Laychak. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications at the Canada-France-Hawaii Telescope. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's
that's our technical difficulties for this evening, guys.
I'm super excited to have you all with us tonight.
Sorry about that.
And
I'm hearing myself on like 3 different channels.
My name is Beth Laychak. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications at the Canada-France-Hawaii Telescope.
All right, everybody. So sorry about that. Sorry about that problem there.
Super excited to have you.
Jamika and
sorry about that. And I'm hearing myself on like 3 different channels.
Okay. All right, everybody. So sorry about that. Sorry about that problem there. Jamika and
sorry about that.
All right. So sorry about that, everybody.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, now we should be good. All right, now we should be good, everybody. Sorry, when I was setting everything up, I have multiple windows there and I had lost that one of them was still listening to me. So apologies for that. Hopefully that's the only technical difficulty that we have this evening. Nobody wants to hear me reflected back that many times. So again, starting, my name is Beth Laychak. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications at the Canada-France-Hawaii Telescope, and welcome to our virtual star party. So every single year at CFHT, we have a star party event that is the first Saturday in December, and that star party is aligned with the Waimea Christmas Parade. And so this year, no Christmas parade because of COVID, no star party because of COVID. And so we decided to take the entire event online. So right now with me is Jamika and Ray. So Jamika, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Aloha, my name is Jamika Marshall. I am an outreach assistant at the International Gemini Observatory, a program of NSF's NOIRLab. I am very excited to be here tonight with Raelyn, the acting manager here of the Visitor Information Station, in support of the CFHT Winter Star Party for live virtual stargazing. Raelyn and I are going to be your eyes in the sky tonight. We have 2 setups going, but we're going to mainly focus on the astrograph that Raelyn is going to be using, which I will talk about in a little bit. We just got started, so we are ready to go, Mary Beth.
So thank you both so much for doing this tonight. So as many of you in our audience know, and those that might not, the Visitor Information Station is actually closed and has been since March. So there's no opportunity for live stargazing at the VIS, which means that this is kind of the only opportunity that we currently have for live stargazing. And so we're so grateful for Jamika and Ray who are setting us up tonight. So Jamika, can you talk a little bit about the setups that you're both working with?
Yes, I'd be very happy to do that. Let me first point my light over here to, let me set my light up so that we can see Ray.
Now,
Okay.
normally speaking, you do not want light while you're observing, but this is just so that you can all see that there are human beings there.
All right. Can we see Ray? I'll turn my camera towards you. Ray, can you put your camera on? Yeah. Just start your video. There you are, Ray.
See me, can't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Get in there. Okay, so Ray is going to turn the camera so we can see her setup. All right. So Raelyn is using a 14-inch astrograph. So this is a Rowe Ackerman Schmidt astrograph. And an astrograph, as opposed to a regular telescope, does not have any eyepieces. It is set up for imaging. So Raelyn has an imaging camera on the end. This is the Celestron Ultrastar 3, I believe. And it's a 3C. Yes, thank you, Raelyn. And she has it already set up and ready to go. And to do this, she came in just a little bit earlier. She's been troubleshooting the camera, working with all of the software to get it going. What you can't see is she is right here now, dialing in other images to get us going for later in the evening. So this RASA, as we will refer to it from now on, is a 14-inch RASA astrograph. And it has been used here at the VIS for quite a few years. And when we were having live star parties here at the VIS, this was certainly one of the main attractions, Mary Beth. So we're really glad to be able to bring that out for you today. And as you can see, Ray is also slewing. You can see that the RASA was moving because she is going to another target for us.
Thank you so much, Jamika. I just want to remind everybody that we are live from the Visitor Information Station, which means that our internet up there might not be perfect all night long. So if we have any sort of pauses or glitches on the broadcast, that is why. The internet at the VIS, any of us who have been there multiple times know, is not always perfect. So if we end up with any glitches, I've not heard any yet, but I'm just throwing that out there in case it happens later. So Jamika, what's our plan for tonight?
Well, Mary Beth, we were going to start off by talking a little bit about how we set up and why we do that setup. So for those of you who have telescopes or have gone to star parties, you will know that you want to set up during the daytime. So of course, Ray and I have been here for several hours. We got set up earlier in the day. But that setup was only good to get our equipment going. After the setup, in order to actually use your telescope or your astrograph correctly, you have to do either a 2 or a 3-star alignment. So if you'd like, Mary Beth, I'm happy to show my telescope setup right here and talk about a few of the important things we use, like the TELRAD. And then I can highlight Ray's setup real quick. And then I thought we might talk about what your astronomers right now, your observers at Canada, France, Hawaii telescope right here at the summit, what they are doing for their setup too. How's that sound?
That sounds fantastic, Jamika. Could we take off the screen share right now, and so we can get an up close, good, big view of the setup that you're going to show us?
Oh, yes. Who is, I believe that's Ray is screen sharing. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Hello. All right. So yes, let me ask Mick to hold this light for me so I can highlight my telescope behind me. Give me just a moment if you could do that for me, Mary Beth.
Absolutely. And while you are, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. We've got our first question. This is from Mark at the Canada, France, Hawaii telescope. So Mark is wondering, how wide is the field of view in the image that we were seeing of Ray's screen?
that's a great question. Let me pull up the specs on the Ultrastar so that I can tell you what that field of view is. I'm not sure. I am not sure, but I will find out. Mary Beth, will you drop that question in the Zoom chat for me so I can make sure to answer it?
Absolutely. So we will, any of these technical kinds of questions that you're asking, my job is not that. That's why I'm just your host this evening. So I will take all of the questions along those lines and drop them into chat and call them out for Jamika and Ray to answer. So Jamika, go back to what are you doing? You were going to show us your setup tonight, right? All right, that looks nicely spotlighted there, Jamika. You are still muted, so if you're talking to us, we can't hear you.
Thank you for letting me know it was muted. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about my setup real quick. And any telescope setup is going to be very similar. Okay, so as you can see, I'm just slewing here real quick, turn the telescope around to the front to talk about some of the main parts. Okay, so of course, when you're setting up, you have your tripod here, your base, and this telescope is on an Orion Atlas equatorial mount here, and it is a go-to, which I absolutely love. One thing, though, of course, is that with a go-to mount, you have to know the night sky, Mary Beth. You have to know where things are, and if you're looking at the right object that your telescope is, in fact, telling you you're looking at. And so
that is such a good point. Oh, that is such a good point, Jamika. So what you're saying is this kind of telescope might not be great for a beginner.
Exactly, yes. Because you do, even though it'll go where you need it to go, if you don't know if that object is actually, for example, Jupiter, then you don't know if that's actually the right thing. Hopefully we could distinguish between Jupiter and another planet, but you know what I mean. So in order to make sure you're looking at the right object, Mary Beth, what we do is do a 2 or 3 star alignment. And so I'll talk about that really quickly. First, let me just point out this one object that I have to say I cannot do any imaging without, or use my telescope without at all. And that, Mary Beth, is the Telrad. So
awesome. Tell us more about the Telrad.
So the Telrad is your spotting scope, and inside the Telrad, you have these 3 bullseyes, which I know you can't see from here, I don't think.
Well, I'm leaning in like I can see them better. So I'm assuming everybody is also doing that. I'm like, tell me more, Jamika.
Well, yes, when you're here and you lean in to this Telrad, what you actually see is 3 concentric circles, just like on a dartboard. And so you'll have your Telrad aligned properly on your telescope so that when you slew to an object, you want to find an object, you get that object right in the center of your bullseye. And if it's set up properly, then if it's in the center of your bullseye, it will be in your eyepiece, Mary Beth.
Thanks, Jamika. So normally when I do the star parties, I am never outside with the telescopes. I am always with inside doing all of these activities. So I rely on such great volunteers like the West Hawaii Astronomy Club. So I want to give a special shout out to Maureen and Andre, who are helping us in the chat tonight, who are going to be answering some of the questions that people might have about telescopes in general.
We're so glad to have members of the West Hawaii Astronomy Club in the chat supporting us. I have learned so much from them, Maureen especially. I love working with Maureen, and she is fabulous. Thank you for being here, both of us. Thank you. We appreciate that, both of you. Okay, Mary Beth. So I think what I'd like to do is just pull out my telescope and just quickly show everyone what it is. And then we'll look at rays. Now, my telescope here, I got this early in the year. It was a gift. It was a birthday gift. I am just so happy with it. I will have to say, give a big shout out to Don Rudney. Thank you so much. Don is also in the chat. Yes, Don. Thank you so much. I also learned so much from Don as well, too. So many people. So this is an 80mm spotting scope, which is just under 4 inches, right, Maybeth? And
yes,
so our aperture, or the diameter of the telescope, is just less than 4 inches. Now, when I get ready to set this up, of course, I do this during the day. And of course, once I have everything set up, then we go to the 2 to 3 star alignment. Now, for amateur telescopes, Mary Beth, we have to do this 2-star alignment because that is how the telescope actually knows where we are, right? So this is how the telescope knows where you are. And so with a go-to telescope, with this Orion equatorial mount, it will allow you to slew to where you need to go after you do the 2-star alignment. So earlier this evening, Raelyn did an alignment on the 14-inch RASA. And what you do is choose 2 or 3 stars in different areas of the sky, Mary Beth. So right now, I wonder if anyone in the chat can tell us a few stars that is over in the west right now here in Hawaii. Do you think someone could give us a few names?
Oh my goodness, I am willing to bet that we could get a couple names out there in the chat. So everybody who's watching, if you have a favorite star that you like to do your first night setup on, or your first setup of the night, please throw them in the chat. Jamika, while you're getting set up, do you want me to talk a little bit about all of the different ways that we're setting up at CFHT tonight to do our observations?
That would be fantastic. Yes, because our setup, once we do that 2 or 3 star alignment, and over in the West, let's just say what we used, so we have Altair, Deneb, and Vega, super bright stars over there in the West to align on, so choose one of those. Also, we have many stars coming up in the East. I think maybe she used Aldebaran. Coming up, I'm not sure which one she used for the East, and I think she just did a 2-star alignment, but it was good enough that, y'all, we have some great things in store, and I'm not going to tell you what she's looking at right now because we'll come back to it. Mary Beth, yes, how do you all set up in the evening at CFHT for observing?
All right. Well, thank you. First, I want to give a shout out to Andre and Maureen again, who have suggested Vega and Deneb. So thank you both. Those were stars that we were actually planning on using. So at CFHT, we have a lot bigger telescope. We're a 3.6 meter telescope, which is roughly 12 feet in diameter. And tonight we're using our spectrograph, Espérance. So Espérance is a high resolution spectrograph, which means that it takes light from a single star and breaks it down into its component rainbow. So right now, as I'm sitting here, our observer Callie tonight is operating the telescope. She, at the start of the night, has to open up the shutter, open up the louvers on the dome, depending on the wind, and get us started to start observing. So we operate in a mode that I'm going to actually use what's going to happen tonight at the VIS as a little bit of an example of the way that we observe at CFHT. We observe in something called Q service observing mode, which means that we are observing 4 astronomers around the world. So just like all of you were sitting there waiting with bated breath for us to start observing, we are having astronomers who probably aren't waiting for bated breath. It's a little late in Canada and France. I don't know if anybody's up in Hawaii and sitting there watching, but Callie's going to take all of the observations tonight. And like Jamika and Ray, who have provided me with a whole list of targets that they're going to be going to, Callie has a list of targets and a plan for the night, and she will execute that plan just like we're going to execute the plan here at the VIS. She, however, is going to work all night long, and we are not going to be staying here that long. So Jamika, are we ready to go?
Yes, we are. Raelyn just said, hold on one second. But yes, we are ready. So as she is speeding back over here to the telescope behind me, to the RASA, we are ready. And I'd like to say that our first object, Mary Beth, is going to be Hokupa'a. Can you let everyone on our audience who are maybe not familiar with the word Hokupa'a, let them know what Hokupa'a is and why it's so special?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've switched to a different view so we can see everybody at once while we're doing this. So Hokupa'a is the Hawaiian word for the North Star or Polaris. And so that star helps us navigate. It also points due north. So in my brain, and this is particularly good for this time of year, I like to picture the North Pole with a candy cane directly above it. And if you can imagine a laser pointer on top of that candy cane shooting straight up into the air, you would find the North Pole and the North Star. And so Ray has just started screen sharing there. So ladies, do you want to tell us what we're seeing?
Okay, so we are looking at Hokupa'a, the North Star Polaris. And of course, Hokupa'a, the fixed star here. So this is what we're looking at. Ray is using, as she said, this ultra star camera by Celestron. And Ray, can you tell us a little bit about how you got this image and maybe show us what these controls that we can see on the screen can actually do?
Okay, I'm muted, I think.
Okay, hey, aloha. Okay, so I'm using Starlight Live, and the first thing that I've done here, is my exposure control. You can see here I have a green button, red button, play, stop. So I only did a 5-second exposure. Maybe, I don't know. And so this is kind of like the rough image that we got. So we're gonna go then to you can see that's lit up, it's blue. So we're gonna go right here, display processing. Here we have a whole bunch of little levers. We can play with this colors and adjust things. So basically, we just kind of play around with it until it looks beautiful. All right, so that's what I'm gonna do now. I'm gonna do a little adjusting, see what we can get here.
Okay, so while Ray shows you, does a little bit of image processing here, just showing you the kind of software that just as a regular everyday citizen who's not using huge observatories, this is the kind of software that you can use to modify your images. Very straightforward, and certainly you just work with it to see how to get the right images. And so while Raelyn is showing you those differences in brightness and all of that, I am going to step over here and put my gloves on, because what's our temperature? Do we know our temperature?
It was 47 degrees.
About 15 minutes ago.
Okay, so the temperature right now, Mary Beth, has definitely dropped, and my fingertips are feeling cold.
45 degrees.
Okay, so we're at 45 degrees, pretty balmy here on the mountain. So I'm gonna grab my gloves while Ray is showing us Hokupa'a, and then we'll come back with a little bit of details about Polaris.
So Ray, you may be muted.
Now, one of the things that I really love is, can you light me? One of the things that I always like to start with, Maybeth, when talking about Hokupa'a, is that Polaris is always going to be your latitude above the horizon. And so here, of course, we are about 19 degrees of latitude. So from here, Hokupa'a is just about 19 degrees above the horizon. And so, of course, anywhere you are in the Northern Hemisphere, this will hold true. Isn't that correct, Mary Beth? Yes?
Absolutely. So when I was growing up, I grew up right outside of Pittsburgh, which is a latitude of 40. And so with a latitude of 40, what I would see oftentimes is circumpolar stars, which we totally don't have in Hawaii. So when I moved here for the very first time, I was super confused because the Big Dipper, so Ursa Major, and Cassiopeia set at different times of year, which was something that I'm not used to seeing. Jamika, is the telescope talking to us?
I heard that also. I'm not sure where that came from. I was having a hard time hearing you, and then I heard that random voice. No, I don't think it's the computer talking to us. I think something was in the background. It's all good. But I did not hear, Maybeth. I apologize. If we talked about the relationship between Polaris and one's latitude above the horizon.
I didn't, but I am going to say, ladies, since you are standing so close together, if I'm getting feedback, we're getting feedback on each other's mics. So if you're not talking, if you could mute for me. So Polaris, yeah, the latitude is what you see. So if you're at the North Pole, Polaris is directly overhead. If you're at a latitude of 45 degrees, it's halfway between the directly overhead, or what we call zenith in Hawaii. You know, I didn't bring Earth down, but I do have Jupiter. So directly overhead is what we call the zenith position. And as we move down, so this is Jupiter, not the Earth. As we move down, we see the North Star farther and farther and closer to the horizon. If you go to the Southern Hemisphere, we're actually not going to see a North Star at all. Instead, there is a South Star or a Southern Star. Now, it's actually not like our North Star in terms that there's not one single star that we can actually pinpoint directly above the Southern Celestial Pole or the Southern Pole. So how are things going up there, ladies?
All right, so we're doing good. So Raelyn just stopped her screen share and she is going to prep for our next object. And while she does that, I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about Hokupa'a a bit, because in doing star parties, I have come across many people who think that the North Star is important because it's the brightest star in the sky. And it is important, but it's not the brightest star in the sky. I think it's the 51st or 63rd. Right. Yes, so it's not the brightest star in our night sky. Polaris is mainly important because of its use in navigation. And maybe Mary Beth, we can talk about that a little bit too, how stars were used in navigation here while we plug in our light, which has gone away.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in Hawaiian navigation and navigation of many different kinds, what we end up seeing is being able to use the stars to guide us. So using the North Star, if you want to walk due north, you can just find the North Star and walk due north. In wayfinding and what we would find with traditional Hawaiian navigation, it is a lot more complicated than that. They watch the rising and the setting of stars as they move across the sky. They set in different areas of the sky with different houses in the entire star compass. And so the Imiloa Astronomy Center in Hilo has an absolutely wonderful star compass, an absolutely wonderful Manu Imiloa program. Now, if you're in Hawaii, Jamika, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if you're in Hawaii and you want to find the North Star, the distance, if you make a shaka, so if you put your pinky on the horizon and you make a big shaka at arm's length, you should be able to see the North Star exactly where your thumb is.
I can verify that. Yes. We can definitely verify that. It's just, I guess it depends on how large your fingers are and if you have long nails, but mine definitely does point directly to Hokupa'a. And yes, these are one of the different ways that we learn to understand and see the night sky, to be able to know where we are and what we're looking at, and to go from one object to another as definitely one of the main ways I learned the night sky. Okay, so Ray is getting ready to move to our next object. Can you give us 2 minutes here to take
Sure,
the
what's
light
our
off?
next object?
I think, Ray, the next object is the Andromeda Galaxy.
All right. So while you guys are doing that, let me talk a little bit about Andromeda. So Andromeda is the most distant object that we can see with our naked eye. And so the Andromeda, the chained maiden. And so the story of Andromeda is the story of a woman who her mother was the queen Cassiopeia. So I like to tell this in the fall. It's sort of my Halloween story. It's the Clash of the Titans myth. If you've ever seen either the epic 1980s version or the newer version, which I like less, but it's that entire story and that entire telling. And so in this myth, Cassiopeia, Andromeda, Perseus, Pegasus, they all have really key, really fundamental roles in the sky and what we see in the fall sky. So right now we're dipping closer to winter, but it's still the fall sky because it's not winter yet. So Andromeda is the chained maiden, and her as a constellation almost looks a little bit like a weird starting off triangle. And so her head is actually part of the great square of Pegasus. So it's an awkward kind of thing there. And then the Andromeda Galaxy is a slightly fuzzy little disk that's looks like, if you look at it, you will not see it. But if you look off a little bit, you'll see this little fuzz ball in the corner of your eye, and that's the Andromeda Galaxy. And so Andromeda is a spiral galaxy like our own Milky Way. When we want to study our Milky Way, we're not able to like zoom out and see the entire Milky Way. Instead, we have to study other galaxies to figure out more about ourselves. Now, I am going to take a moment to answer a quick question in the chat. Andrew is asking, is Polaris observable from the VIS all year, or does it ever dip below the mountain summit? That is a really fantastic question. Now, Polaris doesn't move in the sky. So I'm fairly certain, and Jamika, again, will correct me if I'm wrong, that it is observable from the VIS year round.
Yes, absolutely. We are confirming that. Mick and Ray also are saying, yes, you're absolutely correct, Mary Beth.
Yes, and thank you, Maureen. That says Polaris is the only star that sits in the same spot. And then, yes, we're getting all kinds of answers. Thank you, everybody in the chat. You're all so friendly tonight. So how are we doing on our setup?
Okay, Mary Beth, we are ready with Andromeda.
Absolutely. Now, I'm just going to caution everybody, because I know we have a couple. Crystal, shout out. You mentioned this is your first star party. So when we're going to look at these objects in the sky, particularly Andromeda, it's not going to look like as spirally and huge as if it would be in an astronomical image from a telescope like CFHT. Andrew, don't be embarrassed. All right, so we are all ready here, guys.
Okay, let us set up the screen share. One moment. Okay, so can you see my not super clear, a little bit overblown image of Andromeda?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so now at first I was thinking, well, it's kind of challenging, of course, when we're doing this kind of imaging, because we want to show really amazing pictures to everyone. But the truth is, Mary Beth, is that sometimes it does look just kind of bright and overblown like this. And so here, as Mary Beth was saying, we have the Andromeda Galaxy, and I have to say we're having, this is one of our backup images that we are showing here. Ray is doing some troubleshooting on the RASA, which of course happens all the time when you're doing any kind of observing. You have to go with the flow. And of course, in setting up for this live stargazing event, Raelyn and I did several drive runs, which included getting backup images just in case we had any weather issues or technical issues. So with Andromeda, I really like how with indirect vision, indirectly looking at it, it just pops out at you, Mary Beth, almost just like a ghost jumping out of the darkness for you. Andromeda is one of my favorite objects to look at because unlike pretty much everything else that we look at in the night sky, especially deep sky objects, Mary Beth, Andromeda is actually coming towards the Milky Way.
That is so true. And at some point, I mean, nobody in the audience needs to really like worry that this is going to happen anytime soon, but Andromeda is approaching the Milky Way galaxy. And at some point we will collide in like a really, really, really long time from now. Now, the Andromeda is part of what we call the local group. So the galaxies that are around the Milky Way, we're part of a group that's called the local group, and we're all gravitationally attracted to each other.
Exactly. Yes, Mary Beth. And so here, maybe we can talk a little bit about red shifting and blue shifting. Here, Andromeda, as opposed to all the other objects moving away from us, is going to be blue shifted because it's coming towards us. Could you maybe talk a little bit about those differences?
I could. So when light is coming, it's the same Doppler shift that we're all familiar with when we hear an ambulance, right? So you hear the ambulance noise as it comes closer to you or farther away, that pitch changes. That same thing, that similar concept happens with light. We can actually see that light's moving towards us or away from us. Now, for astronomers, we have stopped using miles a long time ago in astronomy. And we use something, if you're a professional astronomer, you use something that's called a parsec, which we're not going to get into tonight. But for an object that's at the distance of Andromeda, we're going to use light years. And a light year is the distance that light travels in 1 year. Now, the Andromeda Galaxy, if we want to give a little extra information, so it's 2.5 million light years away. That means that the light that we look at tonight from Andromeda is 2.5 million years old. We never see the universe as it is, only as it was. And that's one of the closest galaxies that we can actually see.
Absolutely. I love the concept of light travel time, that when we are looking at any light, in fact, the moon, the sun, all of it has light travel time. None of those objects look like that. When the light finally gets to us, we're looking at everything in the past, even if it's just some nanoseconds. So,
Yeah.
Mary Beth, maybe here we can also talk about why with fantastic observatories like yours with larger telescopes, you can collect more light, why an image of, say, for example, Andromeda or any other galaxies that CFHT has looked at would look not this overblown and much more distinctive than what we have here. Thank you.
That's a great suggestion, Jamika. Can you actually stop the screen share and I can show what a CFHT image of Andromeda looks like?
Absolutely. And while you're doing that, Mary Beth, Ray is getting us ready for M45, I believe, the Pleiades. And we'll be ready for that when you come back.
All right. So this is the Andromeda Galaxy as imaged by the Canada, France, Hawaii telescope. And so it's actually, let me scroll down a little bit. Please ignore all of my tabs up there. And you'll see this is just the center disk of the Andromeda Galaxy. We actually had a program called PANDAS, the Pan-Andromeda Archaeological Data Survey. And PANDAS, actually studied Andromeda and the area between Andromeda, which we know is M31, and that's Messier Object 31, and M33, which is another object. And I'll talk about Messier numbers in a moment. And so what we're seeing in the CFHT image is just the center area of the Andromeda Galaxy. Now that really stunning Andromeda Galaxy image, that we're able to see there, that is able to happen at CFHT because we have a larger telescope, we have a larger camera, and we have a larger, more sensitive camera. So the CCDs cameras that Jamika and Ray are using tonight are small. I mean, they're commercially large, but compared to Megacam, the instrument that took that image, we're a 380 megapixel digital camera is Megacam. And we look at a 1 degree by 1 degree area of the sky. And so we have a larger telescope, which means we collect more light faster. We have a more sensitive camera. And we also, that Andromeda image that I showed you is actually probably 21 images that we've taken and stacked on each other. All of the images that we have when they come off the telescope are black and white, just like the images that you would have at the VIS. Now, the difference that we have is that there's so much light with a telescope our size that we don't want all of that light at once. So we put in filters, which are physical pieces of glass that prevent all of the light from space passing through to the detector. Otherwise, it would be completely saturated. So Jamika, you look like you are ready to go. What are we talking about next?
Okay, Ray Beth. Yes, we are going to go to M45. Ray is getting her set up there. And of course, we also have backup image just in case. Just in case. So before we get there though, Mary Beth, I see her. Okay, she's not quite ready yet. Before we get there, can we talk about Messier Objects? Since I know I've used an M number several times, and so that we make sure that everyone in our YouTube audience knows who Charles Messier is and why the Messier catalog is so important.
Absolutely. So Charles Messier was an astronomer who lived in the 1700s, and he was a comet guy. And so that means that he was really, really interested in the study of comets. And so Messier ended up finding it exceptionally stressful and frustrating that he would find all of these fuzzy objects that weren't comets. And so Andromeda is a great example. Andromeda is M31. And so it's the 31st object that Charles Messier put in his catalog. So M1 is going to be the Crab Nebula. And then we go all the way through the other M numbers. I don't have them all memorized, but I am certain that many of our West Hawaii Astronomy Club and other amateur astronomers who are watching this today do have it memorized. And what's very common, actually, all of these are objects that you can see for the most part with a naked eye, small telescope like you might have, or binoculars. I'm going to give a sales pitch, actually. One of my coworkers, Mark, did a fantastic video this week, and I'll put the link in the chat on how to buy binoculars that are really great for stargazing. If you're not ready to dive into a telescope, or you're just kind of feeling it out, or you've maybe got a youngster, that makes me sound so old, you've got a relative or a keiki that is thinking about doing amateur astronomy, you might want to start them off with binoculars. And the Messier numbers, Messier objects, are absolutely something that thrives in binoculars and small telescopes. All right, Jamika, are we ready?
Okay, yes, we are in fact ready for M45. Let me just change my view here and share. So, oopsie, here we go. Now, so here I do not have all of the stars that make up the Pleiades or M45 in the eyepiece here. Again, my image is a little overblown here, a little bright. Was trying to get those stars to be a little bit more point of lighty, but they are a little bit rounder than is typical. But we're working with it. My fingers are a little cold. But here's M45, a nice view of some of the stars. Now, some of you may know M45 as not only the Pleiades, but also the Seven Sisters. Well, here in Hawaii, this asterism, as it is called, since it is not a constellation. This is a part of Taurus, in fact, part of the constellation of Taurus. But this is not an asterism, I'm sorry, this is an open cluster. And so as we talk about the evolution of stars, Beth, maybe you can tell us a little bit about open clusters. These are young stars, young hot stars. What else can you tell us about open clusters?
So open clusters and clusters in general are like perfect petri dishes for astronomers. Unlike biologists or other sciences, astronomers can never actually watch a process start through finish. So we can't watch a star be born, live out its entire life, and die. And even the process of star formation is so incredibly long that we don't see one star be born in a day. On average, one per year in our Milky Way galaxy. Some galaxies have more, 800 or so, and we would call that a starburst galaxy. But that's not start to finish in a process. So what's really nice about these open clusters and globular clusters, both of them as clusters, all of the stars formed from the exact same chemical cloud. So we can start as astronomers to study those differences. How does mass cause stars to age differently? How does metallicity? So for astronomers, metallicity is what part of the star isn't hydrogen or helium. Now, if all of the stars are from the cluster, are made from the same initial cloud, they should all have the metallicity, hence that sort of absolutely perfect petri dish there. So Jamika, how are we doing there? And can you remind us, Jamika, is this a live image that we're seeing now?
Okay, so this is an image that I took as a backup image last time we were here, so that just in case we had technical issues, we had a nice image to show you. So Raelyn is trying to get M45 in the eyepiece, and if you'd like, I'm sorry, not in the eyepiece, on the screen, and what she's trying to do, what is challenging to do with the astrograph here, and I think this would be with using any kind of imaging equipment, Beth, is that you are having to look at the screen like I'm showing here as you try to center your object instead of just looking through your eyepiece and moving it. And so with the slew speed of your telescope, whatever you're using, it sometimes can run across the screen so fast that we don't actually catch it. And that is actually what has been happening to Ray, who has been tirelessly working on trying to get M45 here. It's just shooting across the screen. Ray, are you at a point where you could possibly screen share and just show us what you have right now? Okay, Ray is going to go ahead and screen share. And again, anyone who's done their own, running their own telescope, going to star parties, you know that sometimes it takes a little bit extra. So Ray is going to now share her screen. I'm going to stop my share, Mary Beth, and over to Ray. How's it going in the YouTube audience, Mary Beth?
It's going great. We've got a lot of really good questions and some discussion, and we're super excited to see what Ray sees.
Over to you, Ray.
Oh, I think we lost Ray there for a moment. Ray, you're back. Jamika, can you tell us what we're seeing on the screen there with Ray?
Yes. Okay. So now we are seeing live from the Ultra Star by Celestron on the RASA. This is our 14-inch spectrograph, astrograph here. And Ray, what exactly are you doing? Can you tell us why we have these streaks on the screen here?
So the streaks on the screen are from me slewing, and it's making it appear like the stars are moving, if that makes sense. Ooh. So I'm gonna slew right now, and then you'll see. Okay. I'll stay in the. I have it again on a. Hold on, let me see. I believe I have it again on a 5-second exposure. Yep. So every 5 seconds, it's like a refresh. And I'm desperately trying to get our beautiful Pleiades M45 into my screen.
The heater is cracking me up.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I don't even have it on yet. I'm sweating. Okay. So the stars are beautiful though, aren't they?
Yeah.
They really are. They really are. And one of the challenges that you know Ray is likely facing is that oh, I see motion, and I see the corner there of stars. So when you're taking an observation, what we're doing is we're not looking at it with the CCD here. We're not looking at it for 1 second like you would with your eyeball. What Ray is doing, and we do at CFHT, is we take an exposure, which means that we allow the light to collect for a period of time. And so when you start moving, all of those stars start streaking across your exposure.
All right, so as we're seeing, as you can see right now, we don't quite have the Pleiades in the eyepiece on screen, and this takes a lot of precision guiding, which I'm sure as well on the large telescopes you have to do some of that too. But here she's just trying to get it right in our line of sight, and as you can see the background stars, and you can see those streaks, as Raelyn was saying, of the stars moving past as she slews the telescope, hopefully to M45. And while we give Ray a few more minutes to grab that, Mary Beth, can we talk really quickly about the role that the Pleiades play in Makahiki, which is a very important celebration here?
Absolutely. Do you want to talk about Makahiki, or would you like me to?
I'm happy to talk about, well, actually, let me go give Ray a hand.
Okay,
And
so I will talk about Makahiki. So when we look at constellations, we tend to see when we talk about, Cassiopeia or Orion, as we look at Ray's beautiful stars, as we talk about Cassiopeia and Orion, those are Western names for the constellations. Every group around the world has their own way of looking at the stars. Different cultures, different indigenous peoples that exist today have different star lores and different star stories. So the star line then in Hawaii, one of the navigational lines that the Pleiades are in, the Pleiades are actually surrounded by the star line of the Baylor of Makali'i. As Jamika mentioned earlier, the Makali'i are the Pleiades name in Hawaiian. It means the little eyes. And so Makali'i was a legendary navigator of yore in Hawaiian culture, back before Hawaiians actually made it to the Big Island. And so Makali'i is these stars are a very central part of the Hawaiian calendar. So there's one day out of the year, it's called the Helical Rising, where the sun sets at the same moment that a star rises. So that's called our Helical Rising. And that helical rising occurs one day out of the year. And so the ancient kahuna would look for the helical rising, that one day where the Pleiades rise as the sun set. And that was the first symbol for the start of Makahiki season. The next one was the first Hilo moon. Now, in the Hawaiian star calendar, every single day of the moon phase has a different name. Now, the Hilo moon is the first, thinnest, tiniest little segment of the tiniest crescent after new moon. So that would be the start of Makahiki season. And Makahiki was the time of no war. It was a time of games and celebration that occurred during the winter months.
Absolutely, Mary Beth. Thank you. Yes. In fact, I think a few weeks ago, we had a Maunakea at Home video that my colleague Alyssa Leinani Losi did on Makahiki on the season, Makahiki season, and how Makali'i heralds in that season. So one of the other things that one of the other connections, Mary Beth, to M45, before we go to our next object, and Ray is prepping, hopefully, for our next one. And I have to say, this is a great team. All the support in the chat, support with everyone, all of our colleagues, Mick, everyone, in order to do this, to pull this off. We really, really appreciate it. It definitely is nerve-wracking sometimes to try to get everything working live. And when it doesn't work, it can be challenging, but we appreciate all of the support and understanding.
So what is our next target, Jamika? Where are we going next?
I believe we're going to where, Ray? Okay, so she is moving to Capella with the idea, Mary Beth, of maybe talking a bit about stellar evolution, why we see different colors in our stars.
Absolutely. So, all right. So with Capella and all stars, when we look at stars, we see different colors based on the temperature of the star. So we can tell a lot about a star based on the color. So a star that's yellow like the sun, and I realized my stuffed sun is upstairs, a star that is yellow like the sun is an average star of average temperature. And so the surface temperature of our sun is about 5,200 some degrees Kelvin. Now, our sun looks yellow, but if we look at the peak wavelength, the peak color of the sun, it's actually more like a greenish yellow, but we're not going to get too bogged down in that. Now, when you look across the sky in any given night. So if you go outside, Mark said it's super clear in Waimea, you go outside tonight, you're going to be able to see a variety of stars, a variety of colors. Well, for starters, don't get Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn confused as stars. All three of those are planets. And so if we're looking, let's take example Orion the Hunter. So Orion the Hunter is a really, really, really well-known constellation that looks like a hunter in a stick figure guy in the sky. In Hawaiian, it's known as Kehehe Onakeki, or the string game played by children. Think of it, if you kind of tip your head and look at Orion, it does really look like a game of cat's cradle or Jacob's ladder or something like that. So when we look at Orion and look at those stars, the shoulder of Orion, one shoulder is Bellatrix and one shoulder is Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse. So Betelgeuse, and if you're a Betelgeuse person, no hate in the chat, please. This is a star that's nearing the end of its life. It's what we call a red giant. So it's a really large, large red star. That tells us that the temperature of the outside of that star, the surface temperature, so to speak, of that star is much cooler than the other shoulder, and the other shoulder is Bellatrix. And so Bellatrix is a super hot white blue star. I like to say stars are like, they live fast, they die young, like rock stars. If you are a hot blue star, you are pulling through your fuel, your hydrogen that you're turning into helium at an incredible, incredible rate. And so the average life of a hot blue star that's very large might be 10 million years, whereas the lifespan of a star like our sun might be 10 billion years. All right, so Jamika, what's our update there?
Our update is we are attempting to go next to the double cluster. And again, I will just remind everyone that we have also backup images for all of these things. Whenever you're doing live imaging, I found that it definitely helps to have these things planned out. So we're letting Ray slew over. I think she's just trying to dial it in the right spot. But I also have my image that I did previously during our dry run. But before we get to that, Mary Beth, is it okay to maybe talk about how we know that connection between color and temperature? Because this was early on in the 19th century. No, yeah, early 20th century, I believe, that we got this connection between color and temperature. And I believe that was a woman, was it not, Mary Beth?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know that there is an actual law that allows, what happens when you're live, guys, right? That there's a law that's called Veen's law that actually allows you to calculate the peak wavelength and correspond that to a temperature. So I work with a fair number of students who have astronomy projects, and that's one of the things that we can have them start off doing, is if they know the wavelength or wavelength range of their object, they can use this algebraic calculation to figure out the temperature. All right, Jamika, so what are you showing us with your screen?
Okay, so this is my image of the double cluster in Perseus. And here, instead of having a Messier number here, I believe this one has an NGC number. The double cluster in Perseus, and as you can see again here, it's definitely a little bit bright and overblown here. This is something I'm trying to work on in my images, to getting things to have a nice dark background where we can actually see a little bit more clarity in the stars here. But this is the double cluster in Perseus, and this is another open cluster, Mary Beth, as opposed to a globular cluster. Let me pull up, I believe we have a second image of Perseus. One moment, please.
And then when we're all done, I have a CFHT image that I can show of a star cluster. I have a globular. I'll try to find an open.
Woo! Okay, awesome. So here, Raelyn, are you ready for us for the double cluster? Okay, not quite yet, but that is okay. So why don't you share your image? Mary Beth, I'm gonna stop my share and we'll let you do that. And then I'll come back and reshare my image and talk a little bit about the double cluster and the NGC catalog, which is different than Messier catalog.
Yes, astronomers fundamentally love giving things names instead, or numbers instead of names. And so what I'm going to show you is a globular cluster. So it's not the open cluster that Jameeka mentioned. It's a globular cluster in the constellation of Lyra. Its Messier number is M56, and this was taken again with the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope. So what we see here, you can kind of get that idea of what I was talking about when I said we look at different stars and they have different colors. They can be a little bit tricky to tell with your eyes sometimes, unless the stars are really very blue or very red. But when we look at this star cluster, this globular in the constellation of Lyra, what we're seeing are stars of a variety of different colors. Now we're going to ignore the very center here. And I say that because those stars are really tightly compacted. So we're seeing the light of lots and lots of stars all at once, which is making it look white. When our eyes can't figure out what the color of an astronomical object is, it becomes white. And we see that in the center here. But as we go towards the outside of these images, of this image, we're seeing blue stars, we see red stars, we're seeing yellow. Generally, with the exception of red giants, the other kind of red star that we would see would be a red dwarf. So these are small stars that are very compact, very cool, as opposed to a red giant, which is a massive star that's nearing the end of its life. So like I mentioned with Betelgeuse earlier, astronomers had quite a bit of a scare at the beginning of the year, scare/thrill. It really depended on how we were looking at that. And Betelgeuse started to dim, which some astronomers felt, or many people thought, could be the beginning of the end for Betelgeuse. As it turned out, it was likely covered by a lot of star spots, and that was actually causing the color to dim. So, Jameeka, are we ready to come back to you over there?
Yes, Mary Beth. And in fact, I think Ray, and I see that Ray has something on her screen that we'd like to share. Ray, are you ready to share? Okay.
I'll share it.
So Ray's going to share.
Ray says yes.
All right, go for it, Ray.
Okay.
So just a warning here, we're trying to get the double cluster, and so while she's sharing her screen, I will talk a bit about the double cluster. Oh, I'm sorry. She slewed over. Oh, she slewed over to our next object. I didn't have a chance to tell you about it yet, Mary Beth, that we were going to the Ring Nebula. And this is where she's trying to get to the Ring Nebula, and we're getting some definite interesting artifacts here that I don't think is the Ring Nebula, Mary Beth. Okay.
I think it's too low. I think it's too low.
So I am certain I have a Ring Nebula picture.
Okay. And so
all right. So
go, please share your Ring Nebula, and I'm going to
I'm not quite there yet.
Okay, sounds good. She's going to stop her share.
So the Ring Nebula here. The Ring Nebula is a planetary nebula. So when a star that's, the similar age, the similar size to our sun reaches the end of its life, inside of all stars, we have a super delicate balance of gravity pushing downward and energy coming outward. And that energy is created by fusion that's occurring in the core. Now, as that kind of push and pull goes on, it's more or less in a perfect balance. What ultimately happens, though, is that the star runs out of hydrogen to turn into helium. It contracts a little bit, which causes the core to really heat up. And then that triggers another round of fusion. And that's when the star gets really big and puffs up and into that red giant. And so it gets really large and puffs up. And then eventually all that's left, the core turns off and all that's left is a white dwarf, which is essentially a fused carbon, or I like to think of it as a diamond star. So it's a diamond. And that gas that was surrounding it, that gas becomes a very colorful planetary nebula. Now, they were first named this way because it looked like planets. So Jamika, what do we got there? Oh, I see we're switching. Are we switching nebulas on me?
When you're ready, Mary Beth. When you're ready, I thought, since I love the, of course, amazing explanation of what the Ring Nebula is, what a planetary nebula is, and I think it's really maybe kind of scary, but also nice to know that this is kind of going to be the fate of our sun, our star. It's not quite have enough mass to end its life in a supernova and end with the black hole. So this planetary nebula with the size of our star, it's just going to give off this outer layer of gas and dust until we have this beautiful kind of planetary nebula left where our sun is. And so segueing from that kind of nebula over to a molecular cloud, Mary Beth, maybe you could prep us for what the Orion Nebula is while I get our image pulled up.
Absolutely. So the Orion Nebula is an area that, if we look at the constellation of Orion the Hunter, so Orion the Hunter, as I mentioned, is a stick figure. He's got his belt, which is very famous. And then hanging off the belt is the sword. And so this is where we're delving a little into maybe a little PG-13 in my explanation here. But so hanging down between Orion's legs is the sword. And if you look inside, you see that those very faint stars there, you'll see a very fuzzy patch. And that's the Orion Nebula. That's where we see star formation. So this is an area where there's incredibly cold, dense clouds. And these incredibly cold, dense clouds are the absolute perfect place for star formation to begin. So we've gone from super hot hydrogen to cool hydrogen gas. It's so cold that it's huddling for warmth. It's what we call molecular hydrogen. So we see hydrogen all over the universe. 74% of the universe is hydrogen gas, 24% is helium gas, 2% is everything else. And that everything else, that is what I mentioned earlier, that's metallicity, that makes things interesting and exciting. But in these areas of star formation, we have hydrogen that's so cold, it's huddled together. It has bonded with another hydrogen atom for warmth. And so it's deeply cold. And in these areas of really deep dense gas, things are being pulled together by gravity. And so star formation actually occurs. And we can see the triggers of star formation. So Jamika, are you ready for your star formation image, or should I show the CFHT one?
Well, how about you start with the CFHT one, and then we can show our image of the Orion Nebula. We have two here, and one I process a little bit better than the other one, so I will show that one after you show the CFHT one, and also that allow. No?
Do you really want to follow my image?
I really don't. Give me 30 seconds to pull up mine. I only said that because honestly, my image is just Mary Beth, you know. I was doing my best. Okay, give me
my image of the Orion Nebula. So by mine, I mean CFHT. I'm like, very, very proprietary. And so I actually have, so I will be ready for that one whenever Jamika is done with her image.
Okay.
We'll let her go first.
Coming up now. Okay. So this is at the very center of the Orion Nebula, and this is the best of the two images that I took last time. And as you can see, the center, Mary Beth, is definitely blown out. It's definitely a little bit overexposed is what I meant to say. And you can see this is kind of a pattern in my images. It's something that I'm working on, trying to get the color better, the take away the pixelation. And this is definitely something that is a learning curve that I am working on. But here is the Orion Nebula, and we could see a lot of brightness, and we see a lot of those the dark dust there too as well. And just to the top, maybe to the left of that kind of head of Orion in this image, there is a beautiful new open cluster, the Trapezium. And I don't have a separate image of the Trapezium. I couldn't quite get all of it in the field of view here with the Orion Nebula. So maybe, Mary Beth, could you tell us a little bit about these dark areas in the Orion Nebula, and then we'll be ready to go to your amazing CFH image.
Absolutely, absolutely. So those dark areas in the Orion Nebula are areas where the gas and dust is so incredibly dense that we're not actually able to see the light coming through it. I like to think of these kind of nebulas as the gas that we're looking at is incredibly cold. And so the stars are embedded in that very cold gas. And as these stars are either newly formed or actively forming, they are causing the gas surrounding it to glow. And so that's what we're seeing. All of that brightness that we see in Jamika's very nice image. And Jamika, you're getting compliments in the chat on your image there. These very, very, very nice images. That brightness that we're seeing is illuminated gas. Now, the darkness that we're seeing is areas of gas and dust that are so bright that we're not able to actually penetrate with optical light. So I actually have two images that I will be able to share. The first one is one from our camera, and then the other mega cam, and then the other one is a image from our optical camera, which is light that your eyes can see, and our infrared camera, WeirCam, which is light that our eyes can't. So I'm going to screen share. And so we're going to start off with Orion. And so I love and adore Jamika's image. This is why I wanted her to go first, because her image is absolutely beautiful, but didn't want her to have to follow this. So
I'm so glad I did not follow that.
This image that we're seeing here, and again, as I mentioned, we have a larger camera, a telescope. We have a camera that is very sensitive. We have filters that allow light only of a certain color to pass through. And we have an absolutely masterful former resident astronomer, Jean-Charles, who does the final processing of the images that we have from CFHT. And so we can see those areas that Jamika was talking about a little bit more. These bright blue stars. Remember, blue stars are hot. These are brand new bright blue stars that have recently formed. And the area here that we see all of these sort of ribbons of darkness, that's area where the light is so dense, the clouds are so dense that the light actually can't pass through. So this is our Orion Nebula. I'm going to stop this share. I'm going to show you a side-by-side of the optical and the infrared. And so this is a really good explanation of why astronomers, one, use different cameras and have so many different kinds of telescope. So this is the Orion Nebula. Again, in the optical, we see these dark clouds here. We see all of this gas that's illuminated by that light from the stars. But remember, that gas is cold. So when we look here in the infrared, and WeirCam is our wide field infrared camera, what we're looking at here is we're able to see through all of that cold gas to see some of the stars that are actually embedded in the gas underneath. So these would be smaller stars that are recently forming, or we even have some areas that the gas is so cold and dense that WeirCam can't penetrate. Now, this is an infrared image, which means that the colors that we're seeing here aren't true color. So if you would look at the Orion Nebula, you will never see this with your eyeballs. Your eyeballs are not made to look at it in this light at all. When we look at the infrared, generally astronomers they keep the same color scheme that we have in the optical. So hot light is blue, cooler light is red. So when we look at an infrared image, the blue light in an image like this is going to be hotter light. The red and brown is going to be cooler light. All right, I'm going to stop share and back to you, Jamika. All right, Jamika, you are muted.
So sorry I was muted. Those were amazing images, especially the side by side. Thank you so much for that explanation on why there is a need to be able to have telescopes that look at a range of the electromagnetic spectrum, because we get such different information. All right, we have a treat. Raelyn has been working tirelessly, y'all, to get us some images, and I believe we're ready. Ray, what are we going to be looking at? Okay, we are ready for the Dumbbell Nebula. Mary Beth, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, I'm going to mute myself, and Raelyn will share. She will share her screen.
Ray, is this a live view of the dumbbell?
She is just about to unmute herself. Sorry about that.
Okay. Oh, I'm echoing. No, I apologize. This is not a live image.
Okay.
But this was taken with the exact same equipment that I'm using right now.
So Ray, do you want to talk a little bit about
So you
how—
can see that it actually can take lovely photographs of things in the beautiful night sky. Just not today.
Ah, okay.
Yep.
So I misunderstood. That is my bad, but this is still an amazing image. And of course, this is using this the RASA setup that Ray currently has on the telescope. So a little bit about the Dumbbell Nebula. Is also known as the Apple Core Nebula, and I think you can kind of see why, right? If you look at it this way, it kind of looks like you've eaten the sides of it and it's just the core left. So the Dumbbell Nebula, the Apple Core Nebula, both are Messier 27. So 27th object on Messier's list of things that are not comets. Now, this nebula is in a constellation that some people may not have heard of, and this is the constellation of Vulpecula. And the Dumbbell Nebula right now is just about 25 degrees above the horizon. Now, of course, as Raelyn said, this is not a live image here, but if you were outside, this is what you would see, about 25 degrees above the horizon. Now, this nebula is about 1,400 light years away, or 430 parsecs. And I know, Mary Beth, you said you were not going to get into parsecs, so sorry that I kind of said parsecs.
It's okay. I will explain what a parsec
is. A beautiful, beautiful nebula. Yes, please, Mary Beth, go ahead.
All right. So I'm sorry, we lost you there for a second, Jamika.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I back?
You're back now. Yes.
Fantastic. Well, I'm not sure what you did or didn't hear, but looking at Messier 27, the Dumbbell Nebula, also known as the Apple Core Nebula, or NGC 6853, this is another planetary nebula. So stars that are not very massive, so stars very similar in size to our star, a G2V type star, will end their lives with this stage, with this planetary nebula, where they're giving off this gas and dust, just like we were talking about with the last object, Mary Beth, the previous object with the Ring Nebula. The dumbbell's about 1,400 light years away, or 430 parsecs. And I really love how with this camera and with the RASA setup, you're able to capture this this amazing color. Can you tell us, Mary Beth, does the CFH get these beautiful colors, and what do those colors indicate for us, the chemical composition?
So that's a really excellent question. It really depends on the color and the filter that we have in there. So color filters can tell us, color can tell us about temperature. It can also tell us about composition. So when we went back, if we think back about the Orion Nebula, so I mentioned the Orion Nebula, we had all of those beautiful colors in it, right? So the Orion Nebula, we actually have a student. I have a student on Molokai, Mallory Go, shout out to Mallory. So Mallory has one of the single best images or set of images ever taken of the Orion Nebula. In addition to all of the CFH, Mallory's is also of H alpha, which is ionized hydrogen gas. She has our TNO filter. She also has our O3 filter, which is triply ionized oxygen. So when she's looking at that, she's looking at a very specific band of light, let's say 10 nanometers with O3. So when she sees the Orion Nebula in O3 with that filter, what she's able to see is something very, very, very specific, the exact energy jump that those oxygen atoms have. Now, since we saw the images of the amazing Dumbbell Nebula images that have been taken by our friends at the VIS, I'm going to share the CFHT dumbbell image. And this is one of those ones that the VIS is not very far off. So I want to give massive props out to Ray and Jamika and the team there. You see just a little bit more refinement. And again, a bigger, our camera is, no offense to the one at VIS, our camera is a lot better. Mega Cam is very
yes. It's a lot better.
It's unique in the world, as every astronomical image is. It's completely unique in the world. And I'm not certain if one of our engineers, Mark, is still in the chat. Mark will correct me if I'm wrong, but the pixel scale of MegaCam is like 0.33 arc seconds. And so we get incredibly detailed images like you see here with this just a little bit deeper complexity that we see in the Dumbbell Nebula. And so this again is just an explanation here. Now you notice on our website that you keep seeing here, we have a Hawaiian Starlight button, and that Hawaiian Starlight button is where you can find all of these images that I'm showing tonight. That is the CFHT image archive. So I'm going to stop that share. And Jamika had mentioned the word parsec. So earlier I talked about light years and how that's the distance that light travels in 1 year. A parsec is 3.26 light years. That's the definition that astronomers use for their like measurements and everything. And so I'm certain that there is a historical reason why they've decided to go for 3.26 light years. I don't know it off the top of my head. I bet Maureen does, because she's just jamming it in the chat there. She's amazing. Both her and Andre are doing like such a phenomenal job. And yeah, and so Jamika, what do we have next?
Okay, so we, as I see, we just have about 30 minutes left. What we're going to do is go ahead and use our images we've taken previously with this setup and with my setup, and we are going to look at actually the other somewhat naked eye galaxy that you can kind of find under the right conditions, Mary Beth, and that's going to be Triangulum.
Awesome. Awesome. Super excited. And so this is M33, right?
I believe you're correct, Ray?
Yeah.
Correct.
I think it's M32.
Oh, I think she said M32.
Yeah, I think M33 is Pinwheel. Yeah, this is M32.
This is M32. I'm going to go over to Ray. Oh, okay. So M32 here, the Triangulum Galaxy. This is another, actually, it's one of two galaxies that under the right conditions, as Mary Beth was saying earlier, you can actually see with the naked eye. Now, Triangulum, I have not personally seen with the naked eye, only with imaging. So one of the things I want to point out is the structure, Mary Beth. When we were looking at Andromeda, my image was, here's a nice kind of glowy blob. But here with this image, you can really see a lot of the details and the spiral arms and the brightness at the center of the core and star formation. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Mary Beth?
Absolutely, absolutely. So as we talked about with the Orion Nebula, star formation does not just occur in the star formation doesn't just occur randomly. Like, we're not going to have star formation occurring like next to the sun tomorrow. We need these really large clouds of gas to be able to form stars. And so what we can see in an image like this, these little pockets, and I realized I'm pointing on them with on my screen with a mouse that you can't see, but those little sort of blue purple pockets that we see along there are going to be areas where we're seeing more rigorous star formation. Now, remember, we're not seeing the Triangulum as it looks today. We're seeing the Triangulum Galaxy as it looked, and I'm Googling. I'm not embarrassed to say I don't off the top of my head know the distance to the Triangulum Galaxy.
Me either. But I have.
So I'm Googling, guys. This is what happens. This is my dirty secret. Sometimes I Google things. So when we look at the Triangulum Galaxy here, this one is 2.73 million light years away. So like Jamika mentioned, it's just going to be, it's smaller than Andromeda. It's also going to be fainter than Andromeda. It's the third largest member of the local group. So those galaxies that I was talking about. However, it's not that incredibly much brighter than Andromeda. It's actually significantly fainter.
It is M33.
Yeah, it's significantly fainter than than M31. And so those pockets that we're seeing are areas where stars were actively forming 2.73 million years ago.
Yes, so with the Triangulum, and I didn't realize that my mute was not off. I was talking while you were talking, Mary Beth, and I'm so sorry about that.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah, so the Triangulum here, and thank you so much for giving us more insight here about the structure, the chemical makeup, and what these colors are actually telling us. In this image, Mary Beth, kind of either on the left or the right, there's some really bright spot. Would that be a spot with a lot of intense star formation, or is that just kind of a foreground star possibly that just kind of looks really bright?
You know, from my best guess, it's a foreground star. So that's going to be one of the really interesting things when we're looking at these images, is that we see a three-dimensional space in a two-dimensional image. So that's why we need something like spectroscopy, which I'll talk about in a minute. So we have this three-dimensional space. And so unless you are a trained expert, and I will say I spent 7.5 years actually operating CFHT and taking images like these. So I became fairly good at figuring out what is a foreground and what is a background. And so what we're seeing there is a star that's closer. So if we can kind of imagine, and hopefully you can all see Jupiter, he's really making his appearance today. If this piece of would is between us and Jupiter. At a far enough distance, you can't tell if this is between us and Jupiter or if it is on top of Jupiter or part of it. My best guess there is that this is a foreground star. So a star within our Milky Way galaxy that is bright, maybe a little bit, I'm not saying the image is out of focus, but we can see image quality. And image quality is how puffy are your stars. Mauna Kea, with its absolutely phenomenal elevation, with its very, very clear skies, gets exceptional image quality, which means the stars that we see, even at the Visitor Information Station, are much smaller than the stars you might see at a lower altitude, like let's say sea level. And so that's one of the reasons why my images are also slightly better than the ones at the VIS. So those kind of fat, puffy stars can be a little bit misleading. Now, thanks to Andre, he mentioned in the chat, and I really want to point it out here, is that M33, what we're looking at here, is sometimes called the Pinwheel Galaxy. And so it really, if you kind of stretch your imagination, but not as far as you have to for other things in the galaxy, you'll actually see that it looks like a pinwheel.
It does look like a pinwheel, yes. And I did forget to mention that it's also called the Pinwheel Galaxy. I'm so glad that you pointed that out. Yes. Now,
that's all Andre.
Yes, Andre, thank you. So, I believe we're trying to get 2 more images to share with you all in the next 15 minutes before we start having to wrap up here.
I'm ready.
And Ray is ready with the Helix Nebula in Aquarius. Now, this is another planetary nebula, but look at just how stunning that image is. Wow. Mary Beth, can you tell us, why do we get these, kind of looks like almost, well, you know what, the Ring Nebula, you know, it kind of looks like cigar smoke. This nebula looks very similar. Why do we get this kind of structure?
So that's a really fantastic question. And I've also brought up my Helix Nebula there. So that we can talk about in a minute. So like I said, this is the sun-like star. It's reaching the final ends and everything like that of its life. It has pushed off this incredible amount of gas and energy. Now we get these kind of bubbles and complex shapes that exist within planetary nebula for a variety of reasons. And this is actually an area of pretty intense research. Why do some planetary nebulas look different? So we might see or think of like the Butterfly Nebula. Why does the Butterfly Nebula, which is a planetary nebula, have a different shape? And so we could be looking at something like some sort of stellar wind or some sort of outgassing, ultraviolet light. Perhaps the star kind of went through a handful of sort of burps and we're seeing different layers coming off at different points. Anytime we see this though, when we're seeing the intense red in your image, we're seeing hydrogen gas. And so that makes sense that that's the outermost layer of this object, because hydrogen would be the layer, the very first thing that's going to be expelled as the star increases in its diameter.
Absolutely, Mary Beth. Absolutely. I'm so glad you pointed that out. It makes so much sense.
Can I give
a little bit of details about the nebula? Just the distance here, I finally was able to get this, is about 790 light years away. And if you're wanting to look at the Helix Nebula this evening or any evening during this time, it is in Aquarius. Beautiful nebula. And I'm glad we went first with our image, because here you come with something amazing, Mary Beth.
And this one is just not fair. I'm just going to say our Helix Nebula is not fair because of, again, that detail and that exquisite camera that we have. It's the best in the world. We can really start to see some of the really complexity in the shape and the really complex areas. In the center here, where it's really green, we're seeing a lot of oxygen. And so that's what the green color that we're seeing there in the Helix Nebula is. Now, I mentioned that we can do something called spectroscopy. And spectroscopy is where you take the light from a single object or star and break it down into its component colors. So we actually have an instrument at CFHT named CTEL. And if Mark is still online, I'm giving shout out to Mark, because CTEL, he's the that's the instrument that he is in charge of and on our engineering staff. What CTEL does is, and go along with me on the ride, it's a Fourier transform imaging spectrograph, which means that it takes a picture of space, and then through the magical hand-waving math that is Fourier transforms, it converts that information into spectra. So if we would take a CTEL image of the Helix Nebula, we would get a picture, but then we would also get essentially a movie that shows us the various spectral lines. So I said that this oxygen was highly specific there. And Mallory on Maunakea, she's getting her very specific oxygen. The line that we're talking about is a 5,007 nanometers. And this is a very specific color that corresponds to electrons bopping around inside of an oxygen atom. And so with CTEL, we're getting that three-dimensionality that I mentioned is lacking in our megacam images. So we can't see, is this gas moving towards us? Is this gas moving away from us? What are sort of the kinematics, the motion of the gas that we're seeing? Now, our instrument tonight, Espinons is going to give us that information about a single star. So Callie is taking observations tonight of single stars, trying to figure out what is their composition, what is their temperature. But what makes Espinons really unique is it allows us to study then the magnetic field of the object, giving us even more information and giving an even more complete view of the universe. All right, Jamika, what do you have for us now? And again, if there's anybody in the chat who has questions about telescopes, who has questions about space, who has questions about any of the things that you're seeing tonight or we're talking about, please, please, please jump in and ask some questions there.
Yes, yes. Okay, so you may think you're looking at the Sombrero Galaxy, for those of you who are familiar with the Sombrero. And I have to say, I thought when Ray pulled this up that this was one of my Sombrero Galaxy images, but it's not. This is an image that she got earlier that is, in fact, the Needle Galaxy. And I did not know the Needle Galaxy, but I love looking at edge-on galaxies, Mary Beth. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're seeing, that darkness on the edge and then that bright center part?
Absolutely. So when we're looking at a galaxy like this, it's all about orientation. And again, my very good friend Jupiter is going to help us. So right now we're looking at Jupiter face on. And so when we looked at the Andromeda Galaxy, he wasn't exactly face on, but more or less. When we're looking at something like this, we're looking at the galaxy absolutely tilted on its side. And so actually a piece of paper would probably be a better example than my planet. So we've got, looking at it basically face on here. If I turn it and look at the edge, that's what we're seeing there. We're seeing the very edge of that galaxy. So we're looking at that incredibly dusty spiral arms, or the dust that goes along the side, the edge of the galaxy.
Yes, thank you so much for that explanation, because you can kind of see that it looks like there's some dustiness kind of on the side, but you're not quite sure. So having that confirmation from you, letting us know that yes, that's exactly what we're seeing. We're looking edge on through that gas and dust that make up these galaxies. Now, the Needle Galaxy. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mary Beth.
I was going to say, you said this is the Needle Galaxy?
Yes, this is
right.
NGC 4565, also known as Caldwell 38. And I think this is, I mean, this is a very distant galaxy here, and maybe we can talk about, Beth, how astronomers determine the distance to galaxies, but this one is about 39 million light years away, or 12 megaparsecs. How do astronomers determine distances to galaxies and even stars, things that are closer to us, even within our own galaxy?
So it really depends. There's actually something called the distance ladder. So the distance ladder gives us different ways to measure distances to different objects. So one type of star that is integral in these distance measurements are called Cepheids. So the Cepheid variable stars are stars that pulse a little bit. And there's a very clear formula that says, what the pulse rate is, how often they kind of come back and forth in brightness, and how bright that object is. Then there is an algebra equation that allows you to put in the brightness of an object and do some algebra and get the distance. So if we're looking at, let's say, Andromeda or a nearby galaxy, we can use Cepheids and that measure the brightness. You can then measure the distance based on this astrophysical property, this physical property of them. We can also then use the redshift, like you mentioned earlier, Jamika, and redshift is how much one of those single element lines is moving towards us or away from us, and actually measure the distance to an object in redshift. Now, most of the time, particularly for the most distant objects in the galaxy, light years is not enough. Megaparsecs is not enough. The distance is actually given in redshift, which is the letter Z. So if you are ever reading on the Maunakea Observatory's news page, maunakeaobservatories.org, if you go there and you see that there's a galaxy that was discovered that has like a Z equals, that is a measure of the redshift, and that redshift is a measure of the distance. So if we're looking at something that is a redshift of, let's say, 7, that's something that's supremely far away. We're talking 12 to 13 billion light years away. And so astronomers are always kind of looking for that shorthand that allows them to explain to other astronomers very quickly the distance of an object. You see Z equals 7 and you don't have to read nearly as much as you have to do anything else. Now, before we jump to our very last target of the night, I would like to show you guys again the CFHT image of the Needle Galaxy. Now, what you'll notice about this one is our galaxies, it's the same galaxy, but they're actually pointing in different directions. Sometimes you can end up with an inversion or a mirror image of the object that you're looking at in some telescopes or with some orientations of the camera. All right, so let's do a screen share of the Needle. And so when we do that, you can see a little bit more, and again, bigger telescope, better camera, you can see a little bit more refinement in this edge that we're looking at here. You can actually start to see individual stars and individual areas of that purple and blue that, again, are that trigger for us for star formation. This is an area here that's either really dense or just backlit by this galactic bulge. So when we look at spiral galaxies, and what we see in this edge on is that galaxies are in a plane, just like our solar system. Most things in the universe are in a plane or a flattened disk. And that's because if you're spinning and these disks are spinning, spirals are spinning, you end up through physics getting a flattened disk. Now, in the very center here, the very, very center of this galaxy and all galaxies is a supermassive black hole. And that supermassive black hole in the center of our galaxy, known as Sagittarius A star, was confirmed by research done at the Keck Observatory, our very good friends in Waimea, by Dr. Andrea Ghez, who recently won the Nobel Prize. Now, for that discovery. Now, she split the prize with Roger Penrose, who is a theorist. He won 50% of it. Andrea Ghez won 25% of it. And another gentleman, Gerhard forgetting his last name right now, he won 25% of it. And so we know that in the center of all of these galaxies are a black hole. Now we see here, this is called the bulge of the galaxy because it bulges above and below that disk. This is areas where the orbits of the stars are going around in all of these different directions, as opposed to the flattened disk that we see on the outer areas of a galaxy, or even our own solar system. So I will stop my share and turn it back over to Jamika and Ray.
You yet again just blow our minds with these amazing images, Mary Beth. I'm really glad that we share our images first, and then followed up by the CFH's images. Okay, so we'd like to wrap up with another image from Ray. And this is Messier 22. Now, we did talk about open clusters earlier, and Mary Beth, I believe you did go into globular clusters too, but if you could again talk to us about the difference between an open cluster and maybe even their location within our galaxy versus globular clusters and where they're located and the kinds of stars that they have.
All right, so globular clusters are some of the oldest objects in our galaxy. And that's one of the questions that astronomers have is, galaxy formation. How do galaxies form? Do they form from the top down or the bottom up? And so what I mean by that is, are galaxies forming from like giant masses of clouds that start to spin with a black hole in the center? Or do we get smaller objects that are forming, and then gravity works the same way in space as it does on the Earth? The larger object has more gravitational pull, and so larger objects can start to pool things together. Now, these globular clusters, what's really fascinating about a globular cluster is, like I said, there's some of the absolute oldest things in our galaxy. Globular clusters have been actually dated to possibly be even older than our galaxy. I like to, again, think of globulars as like cities of stars. So if we kind of think of like Honolulu has all of these city lights. There's all of these really, really bright stars, really bright street lights that twinkle in there, very closely compacted. And again, in a globular, all of these stars would have been formed from the same area, the same molecular cloud, the same Orion Nebula kind of area that we talked about. And again, perfect petri dish. But rock stars, hot stars live fast, die young. So often in these globular clusters, we see them to be more of a yellow or a red kind of color because they're older. All of the big hot stars have died. Those open clusters that we've seen, most notably like the Pleiades, are really, we didn't see a picture of it because I couldn't find my CFHT image, but these really super hot blue stars, those are younger clusters. And a project that students or amateur astronomers or anyone who has access to either a telescope or astronomical data, and there's if you visit my very good friends at the Canadian Astronomical Data Center, every image ever taken in CFHT is there and available for download. So if you go to the CADC's website, you could download globular clusters or open clusters, and you can actually measure the number of stars that are big, the blue stars, and there are actually these very, very well-defined evolutionary models that can predict the age of an object.
Yes, yes, yes. I absolutely love looking at globular clusters, and this one, M22, is in fact one of the brightest in the night sky. I think it's the third brightest after Omega Centauri, which is just my favorite globular cluster ever. And I believe 1 and 2 Connie in the southern hemisphere as well. So we have this beautiful jewel here in the northern hemisphere, and I love globular clusters because when you think about a star cluster, I don't necessarily think about an open cluster like the Pleiades where the stars are kind of spread out, Mary Beth, but instead I'm thinking more of like a starburst where they're all tightly compacted like this. So this is one of my absolute favorite images. And I know, Mary Beth, we have just a few minutes left, but looks like we have 4 minutes left, maybe. If we could, if we could have one image I have left that I did myself from M1, is not fantastic, but since we were already talking about black holes and supernova stars having enough mass to explode and leave a supernova remnant, I thought we could maybe end with M1, this supernova remnant. And I'm sure, do you have a CFH image of M1?
I do. It's the image of the month, and I will explain a lot about it. So while you're loading that, let me explain a little bit about what we're going to see. So we've talked so far about, and Jamika, you can just get started loading your M1 if you want. Okay. While we've talked about these planetary nebula, we've not talked about what happens to stars when they die, and they're supermassive stars. So this is the big star, the rock stars that I've been talking about, the blue stars. They will actually explode in a supernova. And what happens there is, I mentioned in our sun and all stars, gravity pushing in, energy going out. And so that all happens because of E equals mc squared. And so it's just a little bit of physics to end the night with. Energy is equal to mass times the speed of light squared. And so our entire existence is based on the fact that 4 hydrogen atoms do not have the same mass as the 1 helium atom that is created when they fuse together. That tiny bit of energy powers the sun. And so stars go through fusion all the way until they hit iron. And when they hit iron, there's no extra energy that's left. There's no extra mass that's left over. So you end up with no extra energy. M is 0, E equals 0. And so everything comes crashing down. All of the gas on the outside of that star and compresses the center of the star before eventually, and it's not going to be a great astronomical and perfectly scientific, but imagine throwing a bouncy ball at a wall. It hits that wall and it bounces off. That's what happens to the gas in this core of the star. It comes down, it hits this core that's made of, at this point, iron. It bounces out, but compresses that core. And that core can become either a neutron star, like we see in the Crab Nebula here, which is so dense that it's only made up of neutrons. A tablespoon of neutron star has the same mass as the Earth. If the star is so big and there's so much gas that comes pushing down, it will actually cause a tear in the fabric of space and time and create a black hole. Now, at the center of the Crab Nebula that Jamika is showing us here is a neutron star. It's a pulsar, and so it spins very quickly and gives off a very well-defined pulse, almost like a lighthouse in the sky.
Yes. So here, of course, Mary Beth, as I said, this is not one of my best images, but I've definitely had trouble imaging M1. Part of it, well, it's just a little over 6,000 light years away, and it is a bright nebula in Taurus, but it just was showing up as a smudge for me. And what I did was tried to lighten the background so that the nebula would show up a little bit more. And unfortunately, we don't have as much detail on this image as we did with the planetary nebula that Ray and I both share. But I wanted to pull this up because, of course, M1 is the very first object in Charles Messier's catalog. So I thought, not only because it's a supernova remnant and supernova and black holes are really awesome, but as we've been talking about Charles Messier and the Messier catalog this evening, I thought it appropriate to maybe end on Messier 1, this image. And then I will stop my screen share and head it over to you so you can wow us with the CFH image of M1. But please know, and I hope everyone in our audience, if you don't have experience with going to star parties or using telescopes, that you can see that even though we're using, of course, equipment that's a lot less expensive that you can buy off the shelf or build yourself, we are still able to connect to some of the same objects that the astronomers at these world-class observatories are also looking at. And with that, I'll head it over to you, Mary Beth.
Yeah, and that's a really great point, Jamika. A lot of the objects that I'm showing you from CFHT, we took these pictures to have them be pretty pictures, to be able to be in our calendar and have these really awesome, inspiring images for the public. And so, one of the things that I always want to caution, particularly when you are, new and starting out in astronomy and amateur astronomy, is like, don't expect space to look the way that you think immediately. One exception, Saturn. Saturn in a little telescope looks so perfect, it looks fake. And it's like one of the greatest things that we can see. It was going to be on our schedule tonight to actually observe, but it's a little too far over, I think, for them to see at the VIS, because there are these little poo'us that were likely blocking that. Now, one astronomical thing of note that I want to mention is as we're approaching the first day of winter, and this is purely by coincidence, we're going to see a conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter. Now, Saturn and Jupiter are nowhere near each other in the actual sky. Jupiter here, much, much, much further away. But because of where they are in their orbits, over the next couple weeks, it's going to look like they're closer and closer and closer together. And so on the 21st, that's going to be the night that they look the absolute closest together. Now, a very, very dear friend of mine, Chrissy Kellogg, who works at the Community College, Chrissy had a really fascinating post today about how it's very possible that a conjunction like this of Saturn and Jupiter may be what the genesis of the Christmas star story is. These objects would have been getting closer and closer together in the sky and eventually looked as though they would be almost one object. So that's just a shout out to Chrissy, who I probably is not watching, but I will let her know that I gave her that shout out. So December 21st, all this month, watch those two objects in the sky get closer and closer. How do you find them? Look to the west, and they're the two brightest objects in the sky in the west. Now I'm going to do my last share. This is my screen share. This is actually our picture of the month for this month. So this here is the Crab Nebula. Now, the reason that I love this image is it shows how big MegaCam is. So it's our 380 megapixel camera. It looks at a full degree on the sky, which is essentially 4 full moons. So this is part of, and there's above and below, we're seeing more stars there. This is a MegaCam, part of a MegaCam field. And so the Crab Nebula here, we can see the intricacies. It tends to have a lot more structure. Supernova remnants have a lot more structure just because of their explosive nature of creation, as opposed to the more gentle of gases kind of floating outward. But what I want to point out is that we see a lot of really bright blue, brilliant stars in this image. And it's very possible at some point in the future, these bright blue stars are going to supernova as well. And so one last screen share that I want to screen share with you guys tonight before we wrap up is just this one. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo to tonight's team. We've got Jamika here, who is representing the International Gemini Observatory project of the National Science Foundation's NOIRLab. I practiced that one just for you, Jamika. So these are our very dear friends at the Gemini Observatory, myself from the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope, and then Ray from the Visitor Information Station, which is operated by the University of Hawaii. And so if we could just get a big virtual round of applause out there for Jamika and Ray tonight. We practiced, And I am certain that Ray is probably feeling a little bummed out right now, but it went really well and super appreciative of everything. I mean, 2020 has been nothing but an experimentation of what works and what doesn't. And so I'm just so appreciative of both of them for standing up there in, let's say, at this point, upper 30s temperatures for us tonight. And we're so appreciative. You both are getting a drastic round of applause on social media, on our YouTube page. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. Those of you that have hung around the entire time, we've peaked with a fair number of people, and I'm super excited about this. You'll be able to find all of this information and the replay of this to direct your friends to on our website. You can go to bit.ly, so bit.ly/starpartyinfo, and that will take you to the CFHT webpage dedicated to the Star Party. I'll put it in the chat. We have all of the videos that have been created. So a recap of our week. Callie Crowder on Monday gave a presentation about a tour of our remote observing room and Ask a Remote Astronomer. Mark, as we talked about on Tuesday, gave a really fantastic primer of, so you want to buy a telescope, but have you thought about binoculars? Wednesday was a live session, Ask an Astronomer, with Dr. Nadine Manset and Dr. Laurie Rousseau-Naptone, two very dear friends who are CFHT resident astronomers, hosted by Callie. And then Thursday was a craft that I did. It's how to make a holiday star garland. Yesterday was a holiday message and reading of The Night Before Christmas by Dr. Doug Simons, our executive director. And so tonight we have ended up with Jamika and Ray, and we are so appreciative of that. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a really wonderful holiday season. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy New Year. We look forward to connecting with all of you all year round. Happy solstice. And if I forgot any of your holidays, I apologize. That's why I'm a happy holidays person. So thank you so much for tuning in. We will talk to you all later. Bye. Hey.